I'm Will Sayer from MovieWeb. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you guys.
All right, back at you.
Thank you so much.
I read that you guys said the original script draft had a much different tone. I was curious how you guys changed it, and if maybe the original version had like a more horror-related tone, given the writer's background and all that. Maybe not.
Yeah, no. So it was definitely still an action movie, but it was a little bit more, I think down the middle tonally. There wasn't really any comedy, and that's something that we inject into all of our projects. We can't help but do that. And of course, the concept of a person who can't feel pain, who doesn't know how to fight, being thrown into an action movie is so audacious and such a sort of bombastic central kernel that we knew there had to be humor in it, and we knew there had to be a sequence in a booby-trapped house. We knew there had to be a torture scene where he had to pretend he could feel pain. So that was part of our pitch, to get the gig to direct it. Was we're going to do a sort of a heavy lift rewrite and put all this the humor into it, and we just needed that in order to get passionate about it. We had to make sure that we could kind of put our tonal print on it. But yes, of course, there's a lot of body horror in it, and there always has been. That sort of like Cronenbergy, flesh manipulation stuff going on. But it all sort of plays in a joyful way because of all the heart and all the humor that's around it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think audiences are really going to respond to it.
Yeah, we hope so.
Seriously. And I mean, I was curious, like, the answer's probably no, but I have to ask, Jack Quaid, of course, is one of the boys.
Yeah.
Was there ever any discussion of it being sort of a full-on superhero movie? I mean, Sherry does call him a superhero at one point. I was curious if that was ever with the studio.
No, I mean, at least not between us. You know what I mean? I think that, I think that line's used in the trailer and stuff like that, but I think when you watch the actual film, you see that this is not all sunshine and roses to have this condition. I mean, obviously it's a condition that exists in real life, and it's quite debilitating, and it is not fun to have it, and I think it was important to us to show that this isn't some party trick for him. This is his life. And so the first act of the movie, he's in this really isolated place because, while you might hear, not feeling pain, well, that's cool. It's actually not, because you could cut your foot and lose a pint of blood and not know it, And so he has to live this kind of hermetic lifestyle early on in the movie. And yet, that's what really drives the whole film, is that if it weren't for the isolated place that he is at the top of the film, you wouldn't feel the contrast as much when he finally goes on that date with Sherry, and all of a sudden there's like a real person in his life that he has feelings for the first time ever. I think if it were somebody who didn't have this condition and had 3 or 4 long-term relationships, you might not buy that person putting their life on the line to save somebody that they've only spent one night with.
Right. Totally makes sense. And I love the Home Alone reference. Nate even says it at the end of that remarkable scene. I was thinking the same thing as it was happening. I was curious if there were other references maybe that you hope viewers will pick up on along the way, or just inspirations in general that you'd like to share.
Yeah, sure. Not so many Easter eggs. The Home Alone reference is obviously just a sort of low-hanging fruit gag that we couldn't help but put in. But definitely, there were a lot of spiritual references that we were watching and thinking about while we were taking our pass on the script and while we were, prepping the movie. And they were mostly from what we consider the sort of golden age of action movies in like the late 80s and early 90s and stuff. So movies like Die Hard and, Midnight Run, Lethal Weapon, movies that had very, at least by comparison to today's action, very relatable protagonists that were sort of, regular people with regular jobs. John McClane is a cop. Riggs and Murtaugh are cops. Jack Walsh is just like this low-level bounty hunter. These aren't people who in modern action these days, it seems like very frequently you have characters who are like a gardener who used to be in the CIA, or like a baker who's actually a secret assassin. Right. And what that does is because they're in that guarded position, you can't really examine the characters when you're setting them up at the beginning of the movie. And so it puts distance between the audience and the main character, and it makes it so that you can't really invest emotionally in them, so that when things are going crazy later in the movie and the action movie's happening, you don't care quite as much.
And there were also, there were a couple more references, like, the bank heist was very much like Heat, Point Break, we were kind of going for that vibe. And then the fight scenes themselves, Upgrade was a big reference for us because in that movie, there's a shtick to all the fight scenes. His body's doing one thing and his face is doing another. And that was a kind of a cousin of what Jack had to do, which was unlearn the wincing reflex when you take a punch, which is kind of the opposite of what you have to do in every other action movie.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And you know, if the audience responds to this, which I'm sure they will, would you welcome the opportunity to rope Nate back into some chaotic situation for a Novocaine 2?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. We would love that. You know, this was such a dream making this movie, and I think, you know, especially just the fun that we had doing it. It was a really blessed shoot. Everybody involved in it was so friendly. We had a real family environment. Nice. So yeah, we would be all over that. But that all depends on people coming out into theaters and seeing it next weekend.
Of course. Well, I'm sure they will. And then the location, San Diego, which I thought was great. I mean, could you talk about shooting there? Was that the plan all along?
Well, yeah, we shot this in Cape Town, South Africa, actually.
Okay.
But we shot it there because it can play as San Diego. It's an incredibly versatile city. You know, part of it has that sort of coastal vibe that can play as something like San Diego or Miami. There's palm trees. But then you go to downtown and it looks like New York City. And then you go a little further over, it looks like Brooklyn. And there's this sort of like old French Quarter that looks like New Orleans. So it really is like a sort of a Swiss Army knife location-wise. And then, yeah, the experience of being there. We had never even been on the continent, and it was just unbelievable. Friendliest people, most talented technicians and crew, such good food, great weather. So as much as it was hard being away from our families for 5 months, it was a really nice place to live.
Awesome. Well, congratulations again.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
With me.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.